Welcome back, everyone. We'll give it a few more seconds just to let everybody kind of get in their seats. What we're doing today, let's get it off the Hangout window here. There we go. What we're doing today is we are reading the research paper from the University of Wisconsin. Let's see, what page are we on? We're on page 43. So at this point, you guys, you need to go back and watch part 1 to be able to understand what we're talking about in part 2. This is a research paper of the University of Wisconsin Law School. It's Legal Study Research Paper Series Paper number 1473. It's entitled Under the Hood, Brendan Dassey, Language Impairments and Judicial Ignorance. This paper was written by Michele, LaVigne and Sally Miles, and they have done an extensive amount of research, and it is very informative, not only for Brendan, but anybody that has children with these impairments, facing any type of judicial issues. It's a crisis that's happening that they're explaining. They're even answering, why have we not heard about this before? It's almost an invisible deficit that these people have, and they grow up with it. They don't always outgrow the difficulties of language impairment and the ability to process cognitively the content and the meaning behind what is being said. So this is a very informative paper that they've written. I'm going to jump back over to chat. We'll do a sound check. Hey, everybody. Can I get a yes? You can hear me? I got a thumbs up from Misunderstood. Anybody else can hear me? Can I get a yes, please? We'll wait till YouTube catches up. There's always about a 2.5 minute lag. It's French. LaVigne. Oh, thank you, Jeannie. LaVigne. LaVigne or LaVigne? It's beautiful sounding, but I wish I was saying it right. I'm not sure if it's LaVigne. LaVigne. Okay. All right. We've got a sound check, you guys. Before we get going any further, I want to thank you all for getting on this. I would request personally, if my birthday was just a couple of days ago on the 27th, belated birthday wish is that you share this document far and wide. They're explaining that the reason we don't know about this and haven't heard about this is because it's a hidden part of the entire event, that you don't always see it in a person. No EE on the end. LaVigne. Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you guys for helping me on the name. So without further ado, let's jump over and grab that. And we will go back to, what were we on? Page 43, I believe. Or 40 something. We'll find out. Oh, there we go. So this is a figure, just to backtrack a little bit. We're talking about, for instance, just to kind of recap for those that are just joining for the first time, I would recommend going back and watching part 1 because it's vital to understand where we are. But I went to figure 3 on the language test scores. Brendan Dassey is the blue. This hump you see is children his age, and he falls below 1 percentile. And that's not just in speaking. That's in cognitively understanding the meaning of what's being said. And in an interview, they've also stated that the interviewee is the one that should be speaking the most, and there should be open questions asked. But we look at the number of words spoken, and the darker on figure 4, this little bar graph, you could see between 14,000 and 16,000 words were spoken by the police, and way less than half of the words were Brendan's. And then let's see, we'll go back up here. All right. We left off with proportion of question type by interview. So remember, open-ended questions is the best way to do an interview, which is the darkest bar on this bar graph. And you can see the other forms of questioning, which are what not to do and what to avoid, are the highest marks by far. And so they used the wrong techniques. And let's continue with the read. Yes, no questions, which have the highest amount of content and the highest risk of contamination, were the ones used most often, making up nearly half, 47%, of Wiegert and Fassbender's questions, 674 total. A few examples show how the police used these questions and how much content they introduced without Brendan saying much of anything at all. Wiegert, you helped to tie her up though, didn't you? Pause. Brendan, because he couldn't tie her up alone. Wiegert, there's no way. Wiegert, did you help him tie her up? In the next example, see, that wasn't even Brendan talking. That's just all Wiegert. The next example, Wiegert appears at first to try to avoid revealing the answer he wanted, but he could not resist providing the answer to the next question. This is all Wiegert again. Wiegert, and did he choke her until what? Wiegert, did she go unconscious? Wiegert, what? Wiegert, tell me. What questions were also used extensively, about 44% of the total. While they have a place in a good interview on a limited basis, what questions must be carefully crafted and monitored to avoid introducing interviewer content. Again, that did not happen. Wiegert and Fassbender. Wiegert, now let's be honest. Wiegert, what did he tell you? Wiegert, what did he show you? Fassbender, what did you see? Fassbender, and what did he tell you? Wiegert and Fassbender's what questions often presupposed information that Brendan had not given. They were combined with other questions in confusing hodgepodges that suggested how they wanted Brendan to answer. But it was unclear which question to answer or whether to try to answer them, all of them, as happened here. Fassbender. So what Mark's saying is, did he call you, Fassbender, or did he come to the door and say, Brendan, I need you? Fassbender. What did he do? A number of times, Wiegert and Fassbender used an uncomplicated, appropriate question, but then they sabotaged their own question by not pausing for an answer. Fassbender. What did you do then? Fassbender. You had to. Are you at the door? Fassbender. Or where are you? Fassbender. When you first hear the screaming, where are you? Multiple choice questions, which should never be used, were 6% of all questions. The raw number, 99 total, was substantial enough to see a definite pattern in how the police use these questions to plant content. For example, Wiegert, when was she screaming a lot? D started to answer, like, Wiegert, while you were doing it, after you were doing it, before you did it. Another instance of multiple choice questions being used. Wiegert, so if you had to say some dimensions like 2 by 2, 2 feet by 2 feet, 10 by 10, how much blood do you think there was? D, by 2 by 2? Open-ended questions, the minimal content questions recommended by so many experts to be the first used and the most used, were almost non-existent, 2% of the total. When the police did use them, it was not the recommended sequence to start an interview or to allow Brendan leeway to introduce his own topics. On one occasion, the police gave themselves the opportunity to begin the interview with a question that actually did elicit a narrative, albeit in a roundabout way. but then they immediately derailed themselves. Uyghur, should we just go through the whole day again on the 31st? Uyghur, or how do you want to do it? Fassbender, we can try to give him a chance to just talk to us. And Uyghur, sure. Fassbender, if he wants to go through the whole day, if he wants to fill in the pieces, that's up to Brendan right now. Uyghur, what would you rather do? Fassbender, just want to talk to us and tell us, starting with that day and how you actually came to know what happened and stuff. Fassbender, because I already know you were in the garage and stuff, apparently cleaning up stuff. Fassbender, so tell us about that, Brendan. Brendan nods yes. Brendan starts. Uyghur interrupts. Let's go back a little bit, okay? The extreme proportion of content-laden questions did not afford much opportunity for Brendan to provide narrative, and, indeed, there is little narrative to be found. The following diagram, figure 6, gives us a sense of how these percentages and numbers would look in context of the entire interviews. Figure 6, total questions by type, February and March interview. You can see right here that 99 questions were multiple choice. Yes or no questions were 714, and WA questions were 686. Now keep in mind, you guys, stop right there. The best way to interview is what? Open-ended questions, right? Here, you guys, it's 24. They only ask 24 out of 2 interviews, and out of thousands of questions, only 24 were open-ended. And back to the read. Other than a thin sliver of open-ended questions, these interviews are overflowing with content provided by Uyghur and Fassbender's question. It is not simply that Uyghur and Fassbender sporadically fed Brendan the specific incriminating details that they chose to cobble together to create the confession. These interviews were a steady barrage of contaminated content against which Brendan and his narrative never had a chance. When we go back to our diagram of best practices and compare the questioning techniques used with Brendan, figure 7, we can see far these interviews strayed from anything resembling best practice. Stop right there, you guys. Look at this. The best practice is on your right. The actual is the opposite. Continuing read. Section E, multiple questions. An unusual feature of these interviews is the number of times that Uyghur and Fassbender use multiple questions in a single turn. In order to determine this number, we set the criterion at 3 or more questions in a turn. By our count, they used 3 or more questions in a turn a total of 39 times. February, 6 times. March, 33 times. If we had to use 2 or more questions as a criterion, the number would have easily exceeded 100. We have already included a number of multiple question turns in our examples above. This additional example shows how a multiple question format was used in combination with other content feeding questions. Fassbender. And they were just talking. Fassbender. Were they doing anything else? Fassbender. Were they screaming, fighting, talking, pushing? Anything? Uyghur was asked at trial whether Brendan, quote, would be asked more than one question at a single time before he was allowed to answer. Uyghur responded, quote, I'm sure there were those occasions. This minimizing response reveals a striking lack of awareness of the dynamics of the interviews, or how many times this actually happened, and of his, Uyghur's, own personal conduct. Subsection F, word salad and long paragraphs. The way Uyghur and Fassbender spoke was related to how much they talked and was equally problematic. Their language was rife with extensive rambling, disorganization, and diffluent passages. Their utterances were frequently choppy, with stops and starts in the middle of ideas, and filled with mixed or ill-fitted metaphors. These kinds of utterances will be inaccessible for someone who lacks the capacity to sort through the verbiage. This excerpt from a longer passage shows what was typical of Uyghur and Fassbender's language. Fassbender. And we had also a chance for 2 days now to look at what you said and listen to the 2 tapes a little and stuff like that. D nods. Fassbender. And we say, well, Brendan honestly gave us this information, and that information. Fassbender. Maybe I'll call them dots or whatever. D nods. Fassbender. And some of the dots, when we look at it, say, well, I think we need some matching up here, just a little tightening up of something. D nods. Fassbender. We feel that maybe I think Mark and I both feel that maybe there's some more that you could tell us that you have been held back for whatever reasons. Fassbender. One of the best ways to prove to us, or more importantly, the courts and stuff, is that you tell us the whole truth. Don't leave anything out. Don't make anything up, because you're trying to cover something up a little. And even if those statements are against your own best interests, you know what I mean. That makes it might make you look a little bad, or maybe look at like you were more involved than you want to be looked at. It's hard to do. D nods. Fassbender. But it's good from the vantage point to say, hey, there's no doubt you're telling the truth, because you've now given the whole story. You've given good points where it didn't look real good for you either. D nods. Fassbender. And I don't know if you're understanding what I'm saying. D. Mm-hmm. Uyghur and Fassbender were also fond of speaking in paragraphs. In the March 1st interview, Uyghur and Fassbender had 157 paragraph length turns and 19 instances where they followed their paragraphs with questions for Brendan to answer. Not surprisingly, these paragraphs were not the model of fluency. In the following passage of over 200 words, we can see the problems the police language presented when Uyghur or Fassbender got on the roll. This passage in particular showcases what comprehension problems would arise. Brendan would not just have had a hard time understanding this, he would not be able to follow or process it at all. Fassbender. We're not going to go any further in this because we need to get the truth out now. We know the fire was going. We know that he had already had his altercation with Teresa. We don't believe there's a Monty in there. I talked to you the other night and you said nothing about Monty. You said nothing about something getting punctured and leaking out. We talked about cleaning something up in the garage. You told me that you thought, thinking back now, there was blood. It was red in color. Plus, you're at your house. You said 6:30. I'll go that far with you. It might even be earlier. What's going on? Let's take it through honestly now. D nods. Come on, Brendan, be honest. I told you before, that's the only thing that's going to help you here. We already know what happened, okay? Brendan nods yes. Fassbender. We don't get honesty here. I'm your friend right now, but I gotta believe in you. And if I don't believe in you, I can't go to bat for you, okay? You're nodding. Tell us what happened. D nods. Uyghur, your mom said you'd be honest with us. D nods. Fassbender. And she's behind you 100% no matter what happens here. Uyghur. Yep, that's what she said because she thinks you know more too. Fassbender. We're in your corner. D nods. Uyghur. We already know what happened. Now tell us exactly. Don't lie. Fassbender. You can't say it. We can't say it for you, Brendan. Okay? Brendan would not be able to sort through what he did or did not say previously and hold it in his mind, and attend to, process, and recall all the other subjects the police introduced here. Being honest, what the police know, what Brendan knows, being a friend, what his mom said, and so on. Even when Wiegert or Fassbender were reading from the script, they delivered the message in such a way that comprehension would have been difficult or impossible. The February 27th interview began with Wiegert's clipped, rapid, disfluent reading of the Miranda rights. Before I ask you any questions, you must understand your rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court. You have the right to talk to a lawyer for advice. Before we ask you any questions and have him with you during questioning, you have the right to the advice and presence of a lawyer, even though you cannot afford to hire one. We have no way of giving you a lawyer, but one will be appointed for you if you wish and if and when you go to court. If you wish to answer questions now without a lawyer present, you have the right to stop answering questions anytime. You also have the right to stop answering questions at any time until you talk to a lawyer. I have read the above statement of my rights. I understand what my rights are. I am willing to answer questions and to make statements. I do not want a lawyer. I understand and know what I am doing. No promises or threats have been made to me, and no pressure of any kind has been used against me. Do you agree with that? What would it be like to be on the receiving end of that, especially as an impaired adolescent like Brendan with no prior police experience? At a verbiage level, the warning is utterly inaccessible for someone like Brendan. This is a paragraph-length chunk of language which we already know Brendan cannot follow. Before a question is finally asked, there are 263 words and 15 sentences, many which are phonetically complex. Two-thirds of the way through, Wiegert switches pronouns, going from you to I, again without pausing. The ultimate question, do you agree with that, is essentially part of a long litany without any clue about what that refers to. The obvious response to the question should be, agree with what? Unfortunately, Brendan just said, yeah. Section G, what about Brendan? I'm going to jump back over you guys to the chat. We're just going to make sure everything's going good and that I got everybody with me. That way I'm not, reading dead air or something. It could happen one of these days. I'm sure it will. I'm going to grab a little drink. And wait for YouTube to catch up. Thank you, Bumblebee. All right, guys, and we'll head right back into the read. Section G, what about Brendan? Because this is a voluntariness case, it is not enough to simply criticize law enforcement. We must consider Wiegert's and Fassbender's conduct in the context of the person they interviewed. In that context, their behavior was nothing short of cruel. They preyed on Brendan's primary cognitive weakness, communication. Confronted with a kid who has severely impaired abilities to process, comprehend, and manage language, their words became a weapon. Admittedly, Wiegert and Fassbender did not raise their voices. They did not have to. Instead, they talked and talked and talked with the least clarity possible. They asked over 1,500 rapid-fire questions that were loaded with content, often with no opportunity for a response. Wiegert and Fassbender repeatedly interrupted Brendan, distracted him, and as a note by Chief Judge Wood, refused to leave him alone. This interview would have been a challenge for anybody. What this interview would have done to Brendan is beyond imagining. Part 8, Judicial Ignorance. There were hundreds of pages of court decisions written in Brendan's case. In the end, though, the only two that mattered were the trial court's initial denial of the motion to suppress and the en banc decision by the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. Both of the decisions track each other in analysis of voluntariness, with the Court of Appeals majority fleshing out the trial court's findings to uphold their reasonableness under the Anti-Terrorism and Effect Death Penalty Act, the AEDPA. If we had to summarize the essence of the decisions, it would be that Brendan looked like he understood and therefore he did, and the police behavior looked polite and was therefore not coercive. The question of voluntariness, whether a defendant's will was overborne in a particular case, is determined by the totality of the circumstance. A court must consider the details of an interrogation as applied to the unique characteristics of a particular suspect. While the courts certainly cited the test in their decisions, the decisions actually applied to this test to facts in only the most literal sense, strictly on the surface. There was no recognition that there might be anything meaningful about Brendan or the interrogations beneath the appearances. Or to put it in common parlance, they didn't know what they didn't know. Subsection A. Brendan. Given the notoriety of this case first locally and later nationally, the court seemed to know surprisingly little about Brendan. They had the basis such as his age and lack of experience with the criminal justice system. They knew he had a full-scale IQ of approximately 80, borderline to low intelligence. Borderline to low average, but did not place this in any context. They did not even mention his significantly lower verbal IQ, which was 65. While verbal IQ is a limited measure, it more accurately reflected where Brendan had profound difficulty than his full-scale IQ. There is nothing in either decision that shows the judges were aware that Brendan's defects were almost entirely verbal, that they were severe, and that they impacted his entire life, not just at school. There was certainly no indication that these defects would make Brendan more vulnerable in an interrogation. The decisions displayed a peculiar misconception about Brendan's special education needs. The trial court and the Court of Appeals specifically noted that although Brendan was enrolled in some special education, he spent a majority of his time in regular classes. The Court of Appeals called it in regular track classes, but with some special education help. The implication of those comments is that Brendan really is not all that disabled, that he is in special ed light, which is, of course, not true. Brendan was in regular classroom for part of the day because the law required it. Moreover, as the 2005 IEP reflects, his progress in those regular classrooms was abysmal, so much so that the school moved 2 of his classes to the resource room. And the factors that were implicated in his lack of progress were exactly what we would expect. The litany of poor communication skills from processing to memory to reading. The court's observations about Brendan's flat, low-key demeanor during the interrogations played a significant role in the finding of voluntariness and were equally superficial and off the mark. The trial court said, nothing on the videotape visually depicts Brendan Dassey as being agitated, upset, frightened, or intimidated by the questions of either investigator. His demeanor was steady throughout the actual questioning. This finding suggests that upset, frightened, or intimidated has only one look, and that the judges know what that is. But a speech language professional will tell you what the court saw was, as steady throughout, was more likely an attempt to withdraw from the situation that was overwhelming. The courts also took note of the fact that Brendan did not in any way refuse to cooperate, i.e., quote, at no time did he ask to stop the interview or request that his mother or lawyer be present. As his school records clearly show, however, going along is what Brendan does. In classes, he was described as a very quiet student. He is respectful to teachers. He does not offer answers in class unless he is called on, and then he usually won't talk. Yet he will occasionally ask questions when he is unsure. However, eye contact and participation during discussions with adults and peers is limited. That such an individual would or could in some way stand up to the police by asking for a lawyer or his mother is pure folly. The court further replied on the fact that Brendan, quote, nodded as a sign of acquiescence. But the video shows Brendan nodding to anything, even when Wiegert or Fassbender were talking gibberish. The court was equally misguided when it concluded that Brendan resisted repeated suggestions from Wiegert and Fassbender, the implication being that this resistance demonstrates that the confession was voluntary. The court did not provide any working definition of resistance, so we cannot be entirely sure of the standard. However, it looks like the court, along with the state, whose arguments on this point the court apparently adopted, engaged in a wholly subjectivity, I know it when I see it determination. That relied on carefully selected and edited fragments, with Brendan saying, I don't know, or remaining consistent when the police follow up with, Are you sure? An honest and accurate assessment of whether Brendan's verbiage conduct demonstrated an ability to resist police suggestion and pressure requires analysis of the entire interview, not simply cherry picking discrete, discontextualized examples, because this was an important factor in the final outcome. We did just that. We thoroughly reviewed the complete March 1st interview, including verbal and nonverbal conduct, to look for evidence of resistance. We found none. Overall, Brendan could be described as extremely compliant. He acquiesced by answering questions when he was given the chance, either with brief pieces of content, many of which originated with Wiegert and Fassbender, or with a confirmatory yes, 247 yes responses. He also nodded a lot, 236 times, even when police verbiage would have been impossible for him to understand. Was Brendan ever not in perfect lockstep with Wiegert and Fassbender? Yes, though rarely, and even those so-called deviations could not be considered resisting. He did use the word no in his response 136 times. However, many of these were actually confirmatory no's. He replied, I don't know. I can't remember, 41 times to the policeman's 1,239 questions. He requested clarification all of 4 times. Meanwhile, the transcript shows that Brendan changed aspects of the story in response to police questioning 58 times. We found that Wiegert and Fassbender repeated questions, asked if he was sure, and or admonished him to tell the truth. Brendan stayed with an answer he gave 44 times, but even this must be looked at in context. 11 of those instances involved staying with an answer that he had already changed, or changing it after repeated questioning, even though he initially seemed to stay with it. In other words, let's see. In other words, when we look at the March 1st interview as a whole, Brendan cannot be said to have resisted anything. One, one specific aspect of both opinions that truly beggars belief is the finding that Brendan understood the Miranda warnings that were read to him twice. Though Miranda itself was not an issue, the courts took the warnings and Brendan's supposed understanding and knowing voluntary intellect waiver into account in the voluntary's calculus. It is hard not to look at Brendan's school and IEP records and say, really? Really? You think he understood that? While it is true that Brendan did say he understood and remembered his rights, we do not have to look too far to know that it is utterly impossible, especially the way they were read by Uyghur. Understanding Miranda takes a full complement of verbiage skills, from processing to verbal memory, and Brendan desperately lacked in every one of them. Section B, Law enforcement behavior and the interrogation. The decisions repeatedly remind us that Wiegert and Fassbender were courteous, perhaps even unctuous, stayed calm, and never even raised their voices. The entire interview included the admonitions was done by both investigators in a normal speaking tone with no raised voices, no hectoring, no threats of any kind. Such comments suggest that courteous somehow precludes coercion. But what else could those interviewers be called but hectoring? It does not matter whether they use conversational tone. Wiegert and Fassbender were relentless in their verbiage assault on a child with limited verbal functioning. According to the Court of Appeals, the most that Wiegert and Fassbender did was, quote, press with further questions. To be sure, simply asking questions will rarely raise to the level of coercion, but the volunteerness standard requires that courts look at the compounding tactics of the police in the context of the individual. In the case of Brendan's interrogation, the interviewers put 1,525 questions to a juvenile with language processing defects. They had more questions than all of Brendan's utterances put together. In the post conviction hearing, Dr. Richard Leo, an expert on psychology of false confessions, testified that a tactic that is ordinarily not coercive in small doses might be coercive if repeated over and over. With this juvenile, pressing with further questions over 1,500 times will easily become coercive, and then some. The Court of Appeals placed stock in the fact that Brendan allegedly provided incriminating information in response to open ended questions. However, the decision is silent about what those open ended questions might be. It seems likely that the court relied on an assertion in the state's brief that the investigators used primarily broad, open ended questions and let Dassey tell his story. The state's brief went on to give examples. What did he tell you he did to her? What else did he do to her? What do you do when she's on the fire? You just heard screaming over there. You went inside, didn't you? The only problem is that those are not open ended questions. Maybe these questions would not draw an objection during direct examination, but that does not mean they are open ended for interviewing purposes. The examples plant content, excuse me, and direct the narrative as surely as Wiegert and Fassbender were cross examining Brendan. As we said previously, these so called open questions do not exist in isolation. They were embedded in a raging torrent of questions of all types, many of which allowed no opportunity for any answer, let alone a narrative. The court additionally found that the interview's interrogation lasted, quote, a relatively brief time. But like all aspects of an interrogation, time must be considered, quote, as applied to this suspect. A relatively brief time is just that, relative. While 3 hours may not be a long time for an adult professional, we must look at it through the eyes of a 16-year-old with severe verbal deficiencies and the psychological profile to match. For that child, 3 hours would have been an eternity. Finally, we have the couch. It is true that during the interview, Brendan was allowed to sit on a comfortable couch rather than a formica table with a metal chair. The courts made much of this couch and the soft interview room. And indeed, this is the one area where Wiegert and Fassbender followed best practices. Nevertheless, a couch, a bathroom break, a soft drink, and a bag of chips cannot undo the vicious nature of what was done to him. Part 9. Conclusion. Coming into the 21st century, Brendan Dassey is not unique among the multitudes who come through the criminal and juvenile justice system. He is not even all that unusual. He has severe language defects, and so do many others found on court docks and in prisons. What sets Brendan apart is the national attention brought about by a Netflix series. This exposure has afforded us the opportunity to sound the alarm about the common disorder most people have never heard of while talking about the case known by millions. The final decision in Brendan's case reflects much that is wrong with the criminal justice in the United States. The power of AEDPA, a statutory horror that exalts form and finality over substance and justice, cannot be overstated. The Reed technique, which has been implicated again and again in false confessions but has no scientific basis whatsoever and is based on hunch and folk wisdom, is still a widely accepted means of extracting a confession. And if the majority opinion is to be believed, the American legal system has no interest in best practice. In her dissent to the en banc decision, Judge Rovner wrote that most courts' evaluations of coercion are still based largely on outdated ideas about human psychology and rational decision making. It is time to bring our understanding of coercion into the 21st century. We would like to add language impairments, and communication into that mix, moving beyond, quote, a 50-year-old understanding of human behavior and human communication should not be impossible or even all that difficult. It has happened in other countries, taking the form of new models that incorporate contemporary knowledge and best practices. In the United Kingdom, for example, the widely used PEACE framework for investigation interviewing of all witnesses and suspects was developed after a series of high-profile wrongful conviction and exonerations. PEACE is an acronym for a robustly researched model of forensic interviewing that is non-coercive, ethnically sound, and evidence-based. The PEACE model relies on the extensive training, assessment, and review of every police officer, as well as specific supervisor training to provide this feedback to officers. Additionally, the PEACE model incorporates pre-interview preparation to help anticipate special needs or issues with a clear preference for open-ended questions. Much has been written about PEACE and why it is superior to the interrogation methods that continue to be used in the United States. The United Kingdom also utilizes a registry intermediary scheme, a bold program specifically designed to protect the special needs of witnesses and suspects with language defects. This is part of a national campaign to increase public awareness about language impairments, especially in the criminal justice system, recognizing that linguistically, oh boy, you guys, I can't even say the word, impaired, I'm one of them, impaired individuals are vulnerable and face gargantuan hurdles when dealing with police, lawyers, and judges. The intermediary scheme provides for a professional communication specialist, such as a speech language pathologist, to assist with communication during witness interviews and testimony in cases where an assessment shows the individual to be vulnerable due to defects in communication. In Northern Ireland, the program has been extended to include vulnerable accused like Brendan. England and Wales are considering intermediaries for accused individuals as well. Whether either of these systems is adaptable to the United States, the point is that new ways of thinking about communication and psychology on a large scale are indeed possible. The American legal system need not be inextricably bound to the kind of hackneyed surface-level assessments that the criminal justice system routinely dispenses and that we saw here. Until that day, however, we can expect countless more extreme malfunctions like this one. The only difference is they will not be on TV. Before we ever started this project, we were fairly certain that what happened to Brendan Dassey in the police department interview room and later in the courtroom was an indictment against the entire criminal justice system. Taking a closer look under the hood removed all doubt. This is truly a profound miscarriage of justice. Now, you guys, this form, and there's a lot of the verbiage and the interview is attached, is in the library. And I'm so moved right now. This is hard, you know. We're talking about a kid that's 16 years old at the time, and they're just firing question after question after question, both of them. I'm sucking on cough drops. Sorry, guys. I'm going to come back to chat. Um, let's open it up for some comments and questions, and let's do a little discussion here. I'm going to go through and kind of let me update this live chat a little bit. We'll refresh it. You are so welcome, Sammy G. You know, from God's ears to Governor Evers, let's get this out there. This needs to be shown. The individuals that have worked on this paper nailed it. Yeah, you have to have a sense of humor in this case, or you will lose your mind. No apologies for joking, because you know, this kind of heart wrenching can really take the wind out of you. To think that it could have been your kid. I think the complication, if you look at Brendan and you look at Blaine had an adult or lawyer. Notice how I said or lawyer with him at all time. Brendan did not. Blaine did not suffer from the same learning disabilities either. So Jeannie made a comment. That's it. I want them charged with cobbling, then stuffed and roasted like turkeys they are. No turkeys were harmed or wrongfully fried in this post. We're not foul like Manitowoc County. Yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm. Fassbender and Uyghur got awards for this crap. John Sopik says he thought he was going to go back to school. Right there, it tells you he couldn't grasp what was happening. Yeah. Lyra says he would have been scared and confused. Aw, misunderstood, had to go. She'll come back and watch it later. So when you are watching it later, I'm doing a shout out to you, misunderstood. Thank you. Thank you for a happy belated birthday, John. I appreciate it. I'm just kind of scrolling up to see if we missed any major things, and then we'll scroll back down. It was kind of not a lot of comments going on because I think everybody's kind of reading. Yeah, Kat makes a great point. Backbender and Uyghur did a number on Brendan. They actually literally did a number on Brendan. The number of times they talked, number of questions they fired at once. For a mother's perspective, and that's all I am as a mom here. I have no medical training on Asperger's. I will say this. A child with Asperger's or language deficits, as they referred to them, it's like, you know, if you're used to driving in your hometown and that's all you did, and your hometown consists of maybe 15 blocks, you learn everything goes at a slower pace, 30 miles an hour. You come face to face with individuals slowly. You're able to recognize and get the structure set up so that you start recognizing the landmarks. You know the stop signs coming. You can function quite well. That's IEP in the Goldilocks zone. So that's when the child's in the one-on-one or very, very elite small group of individuals where the learning curve is more personable. Now, I'm going to take you and I'm going to say that Brendan is comparable to a metaphor as if he got his license for the first time ever and they took him to the Twin Cities in the United States, rush hour traffic, 5 o'clock, where traffic is going every damn direction there is. And they don't care if you get a flat. They don't care if you don't know where to turn. They don't care if you have time to read the signs. They just keep going. And he withdrew. And they had the audacity to touch that child's leg. I'll tell you something. Some of these children only only can let their mother touch them because they have a problem with physical space. It can set a severe child with these language deficits into a complete emotional breakdown by trying to touch them, hug them, put your hand on their neck or back. Even if you're reassuring to them, they'll pull out real quick because they don't understand what you're doing. And Uyghur and Fassbinder were putting their hands on him. They put him on the couch, yeah, to get in his head. Sorry, you guys, I'm just very emotional. My son is so similar to this. It could have happened to your son, my son. It's happening right now to someone else's son. These children that are playing video games, eating pizza, and their life is just taken because somebody had words that they repeated. And you know what? Why don't we require the evidence to corroborate what they're saying, to prove it? I'm sorry for getting upset like this, but it's just frustrating. Um, LL Grace says, why is it that Brendan didn't have a lawyer? Did Barb ever say as to why that was? No, we don't know. John says they turned Brendan into a defendant instead of a witness for Stephen. Correct. Deb says the world was most definitely spinning around him during this. Yeah, rush hour traffic in, when white knuckle time and he was pulling in. BB says Debbie probably never heard anyone speak like that or use words like that. The IQ amongst his family isn't that altogether that high. Correct. LL Grace says no one can ever tell me these cops didn't realize what they were doing. They knew 100% this was a kid, was not involved, and used him to convict Brendan. How they live with themselves, I'll never understand. Or Stephen, right? It is enraging. It is so enraging. These children have so little understanding of language. I'm going to give you another example. Christmas time. The children in the classroom are told they're going to exchange names for presents this year. They're all excited. They draw names. The children bring the names home. Go buy a present with the child, explain to him you've changed names, exchange names. So we're going to go to the school with the present, and this present is going to go to some other kid that you don't get to keep it. As you're walking up to the school, your child pauses in panic and looks at you and says, "What's my name again?" And you're like, "What do you mean, what's your name? Your name is Noah." "No, no, Mom. No, no. Remember you said we're exchanging names. I get a new name. Who am I going to be? Who am I going to be? Compliant. Ready? After 6 years, 7 years of having the same name, an adult told him they were exchanging names, and he's going to switch his name. Yeah. So what they've done is cruel and unforgivable. They need to just man up, step up, and say what they did. It's ridiculous. I believe, and it's my right to believe what I want. I believe that the state of Wisconsin is illegally holding 2 hostages, and they need to address it. I believe there should be civil suits filed immediately that they are being held illegally. The evidence has illegally been handed away, and they have no way out now till we get some form of new evidence, which they're removing. This is illegal behavior. That is my personal, unprofessional opinion. Welcome, Sasmar. And again, you guys, I know I'm on my soapbox today, but This hit so close to home for me and for you and for everybody else here. Whether you're a parent or you have a brother or a sister or a family member or a friend that maybe doesn't have the same language abilities, but when they have severe deficits like this and two grown men railroad this child, it's just absolutely sickening. Okay, let's see if we can get some comments. Um, Linda says, "It's okay, RD. We all feel the same way. It's all very sad." Yeah, I know you guys feel it too. Sammy says it's enraging. It is. So heartbreaking, Deb said. Aw, Jeannie says, you're so strong, Mama Ducky. Much love, sweetie. Aw, thank you. I seem strong, but you know what? We just got to keep plugging on because we don't have a choice. We've kind of adopted Brendan as our own, and you don't walk away from that. And you know, he has us in his corner. We're there. The world's watching. LL Grace says, "Thank you, Doc. You are amazing. Also, BB, I thank you so much for everything you do. And I want to thank all of you for joining us in the middle of the day. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be viewing this. I ask you, do share this. Share the video or share the document, whatever you feel comfortable with, that we can get this out there. I feel a lot of people are intimidated by that much reading, whereas if they're driving, they might listen to it. So please do offer both, perhaps. There are some people that can't handle being read to, they need to read it themselves. Please share the document. We've put the document in the description below in both the part one and part two. um, Sammy says, well, let's go back. Linda says it happened to them. It can happen to anyone. So sad. Sammy says, Wisconsin is illegally holding SA and BD hostage. Agreed. I feel the same way too. BB says, what they do to the least of us, they can do to the rest of us. You know, this is going to change. It's absolutely going to change. It started years ago, and it's taken us a while to get on board. But that's with anything. Even Zellner says it can take years. Look how far we've come, even just since Ma'am 1 came out. In those, 3.5 years there, the mindset of trusting these individuals and not understanding the case has first, it just was in question. Well, maybe they did do something. Now, it's not a matter of if they did and if they didn't. Now it's we know that the state of Wisconsin behaved with bad faith. We know there's nefarious behavior. We know that it was a coercion. It was not a confession. Please do not say Brendan's confession anymore. Please do not. That is called an embedded confession. You are agreeing that it was a confession. Please use the words Brendan's coercion, because that's truly what it is. Let's get to the root of these words. Let's make them stick with all we got. Let's tweet this to Zellner, to Buting, to King Kratz. He needs to see this. Tweet it to Fassbender. Tweet it to Uyghur. State of Wisconsin. Hopefully Evers will jump on board and help us. Yes, Katz nailed it. The justice system is broken. Our job is to find out, where is the justice system bottlenecked? Where are we getting wrongful convictions from? Number one, state crime lab. Why is the crime lab not having blind testing? In other words, you don't know whose stuff you're testing. You might be testing your own DNA for all you know. In other words, throw in once in a while a random test to make sure that that standard comes back the negative it's supposed to, by putting that lab's DNA on a standard test, so that when they come back and say, oh, it was suspect B, say, no, it was your own DNA. You failed. We were running a test on you. Randomized testing on the lab techs. Make sure it's blind testing. Let's separate the victim and the suspect DNA. One lab have it here, one lab have it here. Let's have third-party testing that has to test the exact same time or frame of evidence as our state crime lab so that we have a third set of eyes on it that is unbiased. It's so frustrating. There's so much we can do. We can work with those that do not know about autism and language deficits. Do autism awareness things. Share them on your links. Language deficits. The children that have IEP, it's not that something is wrong with them. It's that the people need to understand they have a different learning curve. They speak a different language. They understand things slower than we do. It takes them time to process. You can even ask one of them a question as simple as, "What's your favorite color?" If they've never been asked this before, it will bewilder them. And you will see that the child doesn't even know how to think through this question sometimes, depending on how much they've been paid attention to. Unfortunately, a lot of these children that have language barriers come from a time frame when your psychology is being made up between 0 months to 2 years. This is when your language is introduced. And if forgive me, but in some cases, if they are just considered baggage along for the ride and they're not taught and they're not talked to and addressed, these children start off with a deficit and they can recover once it's caught. And sometimes the school systems are able to mainstream them. And then there are other times that it can be something just simply that they're born with, that they do not understand what you're asking if you line it up. So, in other words, if you said to an 8-year-old, a normal 8-year-old, "I want you to come in from school, take off your shoes, hang up your book bag, go get your chores done, then you can watch TV." That doesn't always work with all kids. They literally can't remember what you just said because there was too many things in a row. So if they're firing questions at them, "Did he do this? Do you know where he did it? Where were you when this happened?" You can't fire open-ended questions and not allow them to answer. You can't interrupt them and change their narrative either, and they did that. So Debbie says, sometimes even asking my son, "How was your day?" is overwhelming to him. Right. He doesn't know. It's a broad question. Sometimes if a child is trying to understand what part to answer, they don't know. Kat says, "My heart is broken as well. I agree with you, Jeannie. It has to change." Jeannie says, "My heart is broken. It has to change now. The world, the word justice is becoming meaningless." Correct. We are going to continue to stand up. We are going to continue to send waves through the ocean of corruption, and bring awareness to what we can to keep those people from being wrongfully convicted. So, okay, you guys, we're nearing almost 3 o'clock. I know it's been a long day. That's why we broke it up, but this was so important. I want to send out some very, very special thank yous. Number one, I want to thank whoever it was, and if we find out, your name will be in the description, that went into the Ma'am Gossip group of Jack's West. She does the Facebook group Ma'am Gossip and posted this around sometime in the middle of the night US time. I want to thank Jax for providing that platform. She's always struggling every day. She's very direct, you know. You have to appreciate that somebody that walks in the truth is going to be direct. They're not here to make things easier for people because somebody might get offended. They're here to state the truth and to remove corruption. That's not always well received by everyone. But I have to say, hats off to you, Jax, for always, as long as I've known you, which has been years, of being honest and truthful and direct. Never change. And I hope you continue to do what you do. And I would say simply walk away from those that can't understand what walking in the truth really means, which is you tell the truth at all times. Um, I want to thank you, BB, for venturing out of the nest and wandering around, and you stumbled upon this breadcrumb. And in it, you had enough knowledge to say, "Hey, I think it's important for you to read this, Ducky." And I scanned it, and immediately I told her, I said, "I have goosebumps all over my head, all over my body." it tickles and it itches a little. I have true goosebumps. This is big. This is huge. I can feel it, not even reading it yet. When we get into it, I'll know more why I have such goosebumps. And Zoe was there when I said it. Now I know why. This is amazing. This is two individuals that have the legal expertise from both fields of language and law to come together and really devote their time into making it count. So let's help them make it count. Let's spread this and blanket the media with it. All right, you guys, I love you so much for staying with us on this case, for supporting Brendan, for supporting Stephen, and for supporting our channel, of course. Um, and with that, I think we can go. If you want to join us on Discord, we're going there. If you are afraid of Discord, it's one button. It immediately downloads in just a few seconds, and it pops you into a live chat where you are just like YouTube right here, where you can see it scrolling and people typing. Now, if you are not shy, you can get onto the voice call by just clicking on the headset. You'll see it on your left, and it'll allow you to talk. Now, if you have an iPhone, you will need to go in and give your phone permission to use your microphone. Otherwise, it should run pretty smooth for you. If you're shy and don't want to use voice, but you still want to hear everybody talking, you are more than welcome to mute your mic. You can still hear us audibly, but you can type on the room and the little live chat window, and we'll read it for you, and you'll be able to hear your answer. Thank you guys so much from the bottom of my heart. We timed it perfectly with no real intention. We have the Daily Ma'am starting up in about 8 minutes, my time, which is U.S. Central Time. And then on Thursday night, tomorrow night, we also have, oh, yes, we of course are doing the Daily Read. Can't miss that, you guys. That's important. That's consistency in getting to the bottom of the case. It shows that we're that persistent that no matter what, we're going to keep going. All right, you guys. If you don't want to come into the live chat, we still appreciate that you do watch the Ma'am if you're interested. If you've never watched a Daily Ma'am, now's a fantastic time to jump in. You won't be lost. You'll actually understand a lot more because the more knowledge you have, even if it's down the road a little bit, none of this case is in order. So as we're reading the Daily Ma'am, we're still bringing up things from the 5th. We're still bringing up things from the 12th of November. And you can get caught up pretty quick. And if you have fallen behind, Kat, just jump in now. You can go back later and catch up. We'll bring you up. All right. Thank you, guys. I'll do a little typing here. And thank you for bearing with me on my stuttering today. And there were some words I've never seen in my life. I hope I didn't sound too stupid, but if I did, it just proves that perseverance, the only way we're going to get to where we can do this is if we try. And if we screw up a little bit, oh well, we still got our point across. All right, we'll put some hearts here because this is my heart to you guys. All right. All right, guys, have a great day. I hope that you do take some time to hug your kids tonight. Hug them and be happy you have them in your arms. Love you guys. Bye for now.